I'm so excited to welcome onto the first time facilitator podcast, Sophie Scott. Sophie, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about. I mean, you are the first journalist we've had on the show, and it just shows the beauty of the backgrounds of all the different types of facilitators, expert speakers that we have here. I know a lot about your story. I mean, seeing you grow up on the ABC, and I was growing up at the same time, obviously. Can you share a bit with our listeners about your career story and what brought you to do the work that you do today?
So thank you for having me. So when I was younger, like in school, I either wanted to be a psychologist or a journalist. And what I realized is that there are actually a lot of crossovers between those two fields. I ended up becoming a journalist because I love writing, and I love the sort of creative act of writing and getting your thoughts out on paper. And I loved being able to meet new people, and being a journalist gives you amazing access to people that you would just never have otherwise. And it's also good if you're sort of slightly not nosy in a bad way, but you have a sort of curiosity about the world. And so it ticked a lot of boxes being a journalist. And so I was a newspaper reporter, and then a broadcast journalist for Australia's, main public broadcasting network for quite a long time, focusing on health mainly, specialising in health and science. And I just got to meet some amazing people and amazing patients and researchers and scientists in that period. And I'm very, very grateful for that career that I had. Then what I found towards the end of it, I started writing more on social media about mental health and psychology and things like, burnout and communication. And I found that a lot of people were saying, wow, I love your Instagram post, or I love your LinkedIn posts. And they were really reacting more to that than they were to what I was doing on television. And so I just thought I really would love to just be doing something else in the last part of my career, the second part of my career. And so I changed over to lead journalism and focus on, hosting events and giving talks and speeches, and a lot of workplace wellbeing stuff. So things like talks on preventing burnout, which I just did a TED talk, or actually recovering from burnout was my TED talk. And also communications. I guess the other thing that I've been quite a little bit surprised about is how many people have asked me to talk to them about communication, but I guess it's not that surprising given my background.
Yeah, and you talked about the versatility there. And I love that you use the word, nosy and curiosity. I like that they're on that same continuum sometimes. And as facilitators in our workshops, I think there is curiosity, but sometimes I'm also just generally nosy and trying to dig more into, like, why would someone say that? Like, help me understand that. I love your story around the first time you experienced burnout. It wasn't at home. You were in public in front of all these people. You were facilitating an event. Can you share that story with listeners? And, that's a bit of a watershed moment on its own.
It really was. So I had been really busy and going through this sort of period where I was really doing two jobs. So I was doing my journalism career, which was like fun, doing stories for ABC. So it was really busy, interviewing people, patients, and being in labs and hospitals, doing that. But then on top of that, I was also hosting and facilitating a lot of health-related events. And so this particular one was interstate. So I'd worked all day, jumped on a plane to go interstate to host this really great event for healthcare workers, honouring healthcare workers for their service. And I really wanted to do it. I love doing those sort of events where you're really, giving back to the community. But, and I just thought it would be a normal event. But what happened was, when I went to stand up at the podium to present the first award, I got this massive wave of dizziness just hit me out of the blue. And I had to hold on to the podium because I seriously thought I was going to fall over and end up in the laps of the doctors and the nurses who were in the audience. And I've had periods of anxiety before, so I knew that it wasn't anxiety where you sort of feel a little bit anxious and then it goes away. This was something very all-encompassing and very sort of disconcerting because it just came completely out of the blue. And I actually had to sort of sit down for a minute just to compose myself and have some water. And then I was able to get back up, and I don't think anyone in the audience would have really known at all, which was good. As a host and facilitator, you want to always make it about the audience and not about you. But what that really said to me, I got, when I went to see the doctors and everything, they explained that when you're, working really long hours and in that sort of chronic stress and survival mode in your nervous system for so long, you can have dysfunction in your autonomic nervous system. And one of the symptoms of that can be things like dizziness and vertigo and feeling like your heart can be racing. And the autonomic nervous system is such an important part of the body. It governs so many functions that we don't even think about, like, you know, your heart rate and breathing and digestion and everything like that. And when it doesn't work properly, you really know about it. And so for me, that was the sign that I was really in that burnout phase, and I had to do something because my body was giving me all the signals. And even though my mind was like, oh, I'll just keep powering through, I'll be fine. You know, I've always done this, it'll all be good. But your body really tells you when it's time to just take a break. And so for me, that was about recognizing that I just couldn't keep doing things the way I'd been doing it. And I had to really look at, you know, because I loved all the work I was doing, but it wasn't sustainable when you're in that, you know, physically burnt out state to keep doing it at the same pace. And so I had to really look at sort of starting from scratch and rebuilding my health and my nervous system, and looking at sort of things like I'd written books about how good meditation was and things like that, but I'd never actually done it. I'd never done it myself. And it was only when I looked at all the research in terms of the things that make a difference to be able to deal with that sort of a busy life and a stressful life, and the things that protect you in those circumstances are things like meditation and gentle exercise and prioritizing connection with people. And so I really needed to build all those things into my life, and just small amounts of little activities every day. Because when you're feeling burnt out, and this is what I talk to teams and people, you know, going to workplaces now, when you're feeling burnt out, the last thing you can want to think about is adding more things to your to-do list. So you've got to think about, what are these small little actions that I can take every day that are going to make me feel better? And so that's what I did, really look at how I could set up a daily routine so that I was, you know, being able to nourish my nervous system, feel good, and being able to still do the work that I really love doing. And gradually, bit by bit, I was able to feel better and get myself back to feeling good. And that was lucky because that was just before the pandemic. So then I had to maintain all those disciplines throughout the pandemic and stay motivated because I knew what would happen. If I dropped all those practices, I knew that I would just go back to where I was, and I didn't really want to do that.
No, and it's really interesting. I mean, again, you spoke about the signals that you had, and your mind's like, it's okay, I'll just push through. And I'm very similar to that. So I'll say yes to everything because I like doing stuff. And often, you know, success in society can be, you know, how busy you are. There seems to be a correlation that we kind of need to break. And we're so caught up in it. It's fun. We're waking up. What am I doing now? And you're right. It's just a kind of slippery scale where, you know, the sleep might not be as good. As a result, then you don't do the exercise, and then you eat poorly. It's kind of, this can happen.
Exactly.
I don't know if
you get into that cycle where you think, oh, and you don't sleep well, and then you think, oh, I won't go to the gym, and then you probably make less than ideal choices with what you're eating. And back then, I don't drink alcohol anymore, but back then I was drinking as well. And so you'd be like, oh, I'll have a couple of glasses of wine, and, you know, to relax after a big week, and that then impacts your sleep. So the whole cycle starts again.
It does. So I'm glad you're here. Now, the other thing, you mentioned meditation, and I have this, it's like, I'm with you. Like, everyone tells you to do it. And then, you know, I try, and it's something like, I'm not getting instant results from this. So like, you know, whereas if you go for a run, you just feel instantly good. Can you tell me about, so I think it's really important. I think the whole like centering, even before you get out to a group and getting aligned, I think that's, you know, and just slowing that down is really key.
Yeah. So that's the thing though, with meditation and doing it every day. So I made a point, and I still make a point of doing like a short 5-minute meditation as soon as I wake up in the morning. So before you start to do anything else, before you start to even get up and have like tea or coffee or whatever else, just do that thing, do 5 minutes of meditation, really just to start the day in a really mindful way. And there's, you know, really good research to show that the way you start the day can really impact how you feel for the rest of the day. And the thing about doing like 5 minutes of something every day is that it means that you've got that muscle memory. And so that when you're about to go out on stage, when you're about to facilitate a big event, you can just do those few moments of sort of deep centered breathing, and it'll get you back into that relaxed state that you feel first thing in the morning when you wake up. And so that's why it's so valuable. It's such a valuable skill for people who are doing events and facilitating events and hosting events to have, because you can't just turn it on when you need to. You need to be able to just call on it and sort of draw from those feelings that you have from doing it regularly. And so that's what I realized. Once I started sort of embedding those practices every day so that you don't need to sort of choose to do it. It's so automatic that you just do it without thinking. And that's what we want. We want to be able to just go, oh, I don't need to actively choose to do something that's going to make me feel good. I know that I'm just going to do it. You don't wait for the motivation. You don't wait for because motivation, you can't rely on motivation, because it's the same with like exercise. If you just rely on motivation, you'll be up and down all the time. But if you just make it an automatic behavior, and then you don't have to choose to do it. And then it really makes a difference, because when you need it, it's in those stressful moments, like you're about to go on stage or you're about to stand up in front of a big group of people, you can just call on it, and you just give yourself that couple of minutes to just get into that really relaxed and centered, grounded, frame of mind. Think about the audience, think about the value that you're bringing to the audience. It's what I always think about. Take the focus off you, put it on them. It's all about them. The value and the knowledge that you have that you're going to impart to them. If you're giving a talk, or even if I'm facilitating an event, thinking about what is it the audience really needs to get out of this? What do they want to leave at the end of the session feeling like they've accomplished? And that also really helps as well, I found, because, people say, oh, do you get nervous going on stage, or do you get nervous before an event? And if you do that mindset shift where it's about the audience, what are they going to get out of it? What are they going to leave feeling? Then it takes the focus off you. And, nerves come and anxiety comes from focusing on ourselves. And if you shift the focus over to the audience and say, I want them to walk out of here feeling like it was worthwhile, like they learned something, they're motivated, they're going to put some new practice into their life that they've been wanting to do for ages, then you think, what? This is not about me. It's about what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, I love that. And that's like when I was early on in my career, it was all about the focus was on me. It's funny. I had this incident. I had my new Apple Watch, and I was part of a panel, and I got this signal that my heart rate was too high for me sitting down. And I was like, okay, to start breathing, but I couldn't. So I just tried to do some just calm myself down. But like you said, it's building up the practice so that when you need it, you're able to tune into it. You talked about embedding. I really like that idea because I think what my problem is, I try to start my day and then go back to meditation, but it's actually just kickstart it off with the intention, which is really great. There's a blog article you wrote, and I think it relates to this. It relates to I think, being outside of our comfort zone, but you wrote about why it's okay to be anxious outside your comfort zone. And I think that's a really great statement phrase for first-time facilitators, because often it is scary getting up in front of a group and doing what we do. What's good anxiety when it comes to stepping out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, so that was a post that I wrote just after I'd done a TED talk, because I didn't want people to think, oh, wow, just like what you said, for someone who might want to do something, but they think, oh, I don't want to do it because I'll be too anxious and I won't be able to, feel good about it. I wanted to just get across that it's okay to feel uncomfortable when you're doing something different. It's actually part of the process. It's actually part of the process of growth, is to step into those feelings where you do feel uncomfortable, because that's how we grow. If everything is always comfortable and easy, and you're never going to be able to actually extend yourself, learn new skills, and particularly, if it's about, in front of an audience and you're facilitating, you need to be able to feel okay with the discomfort, rather than thinking I've got to get rid of it, because that just causes more discomfort when you think I've got to push these feelings of anxiety or discomfort away, and I should be able to just breeze through this and not feel, anxious at all. So just being able to sit with it and just being able to sort of move past it. So I think that was the message I was trying to get across, because what surprised me was when I was doing my TED talk, I'd rehearsed it and I knew the content really, really well. And so I wasn't worried about that. But I started to have on stage the physical symptoms of feeling quite anxious, when you sort of feel a bit wobbly, but then, I didn't sort of want to react, or I just basically said to myself, oh, okay, your body's feeling a bit anxious. That's the way it is. And just keep going and not try to sort of get overwhelmed by it, and just basically sit with it. And that was the way through it and out the other side. And when you watch the recording back, and that's the thing that people, you can't tell. No one would have any idea. And it's the same if you're standing up to do facilitating, whether you've done it once or 100 times, if you're nervous or anxious, the audience will not know. The most important thing is that you just smile and keep going. And that's the way you get through it. And the audience is really just there to hear what you have to say, or if you're doing facilitation, they're there so that you can draw the best out of them and you can really, get whatever resolutions you're hoping to get from that session. And, it's called the spotlight effect. They're not actually thinking about you when you're on stage or when you're facilitating. They're thinking about themselves. And they're probably thinking, what am I going to have for dinner? Or, what day do I have to pick up my dry cleaning? Or they're probably thinking of something not related to you whatsoever. So I think remembering that is also important as well, that, most audiences are very friendly and they're just there to hear what you have to say. And most of the time they're not thinking about you anyway.
It's so true. I was at an event last week in Hobart and it was a 4-day event. I was a participant there, but you're right. It's not like for 8 hours of the day, I was like solely focused on them. Like I was going in and out. I really like that. You sharing that idea of the spotlight effect. I'm curious around, you talk about facilitating and in your context about bringing the best out of people. And maybe what are maybe some parallels between facilitating, like the work that you do now, and your work as a journalist and where you're trying to extract information? Do you see the similarities between the two, and what tips can you pass on from that?
So there are a lot of similarities, and it really comes down to the quality of the questions that you ask. So when you're, as a journalist, particularly a broadcast journalist, when you're on TV, you generally don't, unless you're doing like a live interview for a TV show where both of you will be on camera, but the majority of times you'll just be hearing the person's answers will be on camera. So the reason that's important is because you can't ask someone a question where the answer is going to be yes or no, because the audience generally won't hear the question. So you need to have an answer which contains the question as well. And the way to do that, and this is a great skill, to use for facilitators as well, is to think about asking open-ended questions. So things like, why is that the reason? Or can you explain how this is the case? Or can you go into some detail talking about this part of your strategy? Rather than questions that are going to just elicit do you agree with that statement? Yes or no? And if they say yes, it'd be like, well, that's a conversation ender. When yes or no, there's nowhere to go from there. Whereas if you ask really good open questions, it facilitates much deeper discussion. And a really great example, Leanne, one of our sons has just finished doing an MBA at Harvard, which was amazing for him. But it was also amazing for me because I got to go and visit last year and we could sit in on a lecture. And it wasn't a lecture like a lecturer standing up there just lecturing. The way it works is all case study based, and all the people doing the course have to go and learn the case study, the business case really well. And then what happens, it's a facilitated discussion between all the students and they're marked on their answers. That becomes half of their mark for the whole MBA, is the quality of the answers that they give in those sessions. Not essays, not just regurgitating information, but the quality of their answers. And so that was a really eye-opening moment for me as well, showing you the power of asking good questions and to get really valuable answers. And it's the same thing for people who are facilitating as well. Think about the sort of questions you're asking that are going to get those answers that give you the analysis and the depth that you want. And so it's like the sort of questions about, why or how. And it's very similar to journalism. So you want, the facts, like who and what and where and how, but it's the how and the why that are really crucial. And the other thing is, with journalism and also facilitating, is getting to the emotional center of the topic, and also the storytelling aspects of which there are storytelling aspects in whatever context you're in. That's where you really get to the emotional heart of the topic that you're dealing with. If you can get people telling their stories, get them to focus on, their experiences. And that's why things like TED Talks are so powerful, because it's basically just someone telling their story. And we know from research, and this is something that when I do workshops on communication for companies and different teams, that I talk about the power of storytelling, because all the research shows that it's storytelling that helps people remember things, and it also elicits behavior change. So if you're trying to get people to change their behavior, the most powerful way to do it is by telling stories.
Yeah, it's I ran this multi-day leadership course, and I remember this is a program that our parent company rolled out. So we had to stick by the script. And on the first day in the afternoon, there's like a storytelling component. I was like, oh, people will be pretty tired. But it was like the opposite effect. Like everyone was just, look across the room. I remember filming like the leader in the room, and that was so engaged. They were leaning in, smiling. Massive power in it. And yet a lot of the time, and sometimes, you know, I'm guilty of it as well. I'll go to like the logical part, like the skills and the knowledge. But even you, Sophie, sharing your story of that time you felt that dizziness, like we'll never forget that.
It's so true. And I think that's the thing. I think, you know, we often, because you and I are both, you know, interested in evidence and we want things to be evidence-based, you know, you need both. You need to have good evidence and good, strong foundation to build, you know, if it's a talk or you're facilitating something. But the thing that people will remember, and the thing that will change their behavior and get them to take action, is you telling stories and getting them, if it's a facilitation, getting them to tell their own story as well in a way that they feel comfortable. So I think that's been, and, you know, I think one of the things that being a journalist for so long is that and so much of the journalism, particularly in the last few years, has been very much based on, you know, case studies and people telling their story, because there was a real recognition that that's what the audience identifies with. The audience would hear a story of someone's experience and really think, oh, that could be me, or that could be my neighbor. And then that would really get their attention. And then they could sort of lean in and listen to the rest of the story, where we'd unpack all the data and the research and make sure that that was really solid as well. So you need the combination of both. And that's what I'm aiming to do with everything I do now, and any of the talks I give or the workshops. It's the same thing, you know, a strong focus on storytelling backed up by really good evidence and really good data. And that way you sort of have the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you're right about the relatability of that story and it resonating with people, as opposed to, because I know like lots of people talk about, oh, Uber does this, but it's like, I don't relate to Uber. My company doesn't relate to Uber. So it's like us sharing our stories. I guess something you talked about, you know, as a journalist, you're having to go in and talk to people you haven't really met before, and you're getting them to open up. So you have to develop trust or confidence in you very quickly. I would imagine you do the same in your groups. When you're there for a few hours, you want people to share their stories. Did you sort of strategically, was there something that you did with your body language to help create that trust instantly? Or yeah.
Look, I think the most important thing is to be authentic and to be yourself. So, and that was whether you're being, you know, whether I was a journalist interviewing a patient or interviewing a prime minister, or no matter who it was, you just need to be yourself, and also recognize that you need to put the other person at ease, because particularly as a journalist, when I used to go around with a TV camera every day, that's just what I did every day. But I had to remember and remind myself that this was unusual for someone for me to be going into their office or their consulting room or the hospital, and to be, you know, shoving a camera in their face. And so it was my role to help them feel as relaxed and comfortable as possible, so that they could then be as open and as possible. And the ideal for me was for them to forget that the camera was there, so that it was just a conversation. And I would actually say that. I would say, Leanne, I'm coming to talk to you today about facilitating. I just, you know, I want us to just have a conversation, and I want you to almost forget the camera's there, and just, it's going to be a discussion just between us. And that way it's going to come across as, you'll come across as really relaxed and natural and authentic. And by just sort of setting the other person at ease, it makes a massive difference to how someone feels. It's almost like you give them permission just to relax and be themselves. And I would also tell them, you know, there's no wrong answers. We just really want your opinion. It's not like don't feel like you've got to remember stuff, or you don't need to remember a whole lot of facts and figures. We just really want your experience and your opinion. And it's the same thing facilitating a session as well. You know, even though people there have expertise, they're not there just to grill them, or you're not there to sort of see how much they know about a particular topic. You're just there to draw out their knowledge, which so many people have. And the more relaxed they are, the more that's likely to come out. And it's the same. I do a lot of panel discussions at conferences, and I find the same thing. I always do a pre-interview with people in the lead up to the event. So like a week, ideally a week or so before, because what I find is when you're just talking to them, whether it's over the phone or on Zoom, and there's no pressure, then they'll say really interesting, insightful things. And sometimes when you're up on stage at a conference, they'll be a bit nervous and they'll forget all that really good stuff. But if I've got notes, I can prompt them and say, oh, Leanne, remember we were talking last week and you mentioned that you did this at this conference? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, actually, this was one of my tips for doing this. And so it's actually really helpful. I would, if anyone else is doing any panel discussions or forums, I would highly recommend they do pre-interviews, because people do forget really good stuff when they're in the spotlight. They forget because they, might get a bit overwhelmed, and you can remind them of all this really good information that they've already given you. Then they're like, oh yeah, that's right. And then they'll tell this great story or they'll recount something really important. So I think that that preparation is also something I learned from being a journalist as well, being really prepared before you go and interview someone, thinking about what you want to ask them, understanding the topic as much as you can. So not going in cold. And it's the same thing with facilitating. The more you can go in understanding a topic and ideally, knowing a little about it before you go, so that you can then draw the best out of the people. And that's what you're there for. You're there to draw the best out of the people around you.
Yeah. And so you're not starting from sort of a base level. You've already got, you can go in and basically hit the ground running as well. I love that you do those pre-interviews so you can get those like juicy things and then weave them back in when you're live. That's a really good tip. In terms of other preparation, it's great.
It's such a great tip. And I can really tell the difference when I do those pre-interviews. And then sometimes people are too busy and they're like, oh, I don't have time to do it. I think the quality of interviews and panel discussions or facilitated discussions that you do when you do those pre-interviews is so much better when you've done the preparation. It also means they've been thinking about it as well, because they've done the pre-interview. So it's sort of in their mind rather than them having to think, oh, what am I going to say? And they don't really think about it till they're up on stage. So I think it helps the participants as well.
And how do you balance when you're up on a panel and someone that wants to just keep like responding to a question, you want to share that space with the other, say 2 or 3 panelists? Do you have any strategies for that? Have you had incidents that you have to mention?
Yes, I did one panel discussion ages ago, and I asked one of the panelists a question, and literally he spoke for like about 8 minutes, and it was only like a 25-minute panel discussion. And what that meant was that I couldn't go back and ask him another question. I couldn't go back and even include him in any of the other discussion, because I knew that if I did, he might hog the discussion again and take up another, 5 or 8 minutes. So that was a bit of a, object lesson. And I think sometimes you just have to actually cut people off and just say, oh, that's great, thank you. We better move on now, and just be really, because I want to hear from X and Y. About what they think, so sometimes you have to actually jump in. You can't just sit back. You have to be proactive. You can't just sit back and think, oh, eventually they'll stop talking. Well, you know what? They may not. They might just keep going. And, that's your role, really. Your role is to make sure that everyone on that panel or on that stage gets a chance to be heard. And there's nothing worse than doing a panel discussion, or I've been at, in the audience where, 1 or 2 people hog the discussion, and you really feel for the other people that they didn't have a chance to say their views. So I think that another tip though, Leanne, is if you can have input into the makeup and the number of people involved, that also helps, because oftentimes I find if there are too many people in the panel, it becomes unwieldy, and you just simply you don't have the time to get round to all the panelists and get a really, insightful comments from as many as possible. So I would prefer, I like having input if I can into the panelists and how many, but ideally, my ideal would be 4 panelists, no more than 4 guests, and me as the facilitator. That's ideal. Even 3 and the panel facilitator is good. Any more than that, when it gets up to 6 and 7, it's too many.
Yeah, well, we're having a conversation about panels in the Flipchart Facebook group, and Ken Bergen, shout out to Ken in Sydney, he was talking about, he'd been to a conference and he noticed 2 things. Like one is, he said it was really boring when all the panelists agree on something, because it's like, okay, just tell me something I don't know. And the second thing was when you ask a question and you get all 3 to answer, then you ask the next question, you get all 3 to answer.
Exactly. And so the other thing I do, that's another good thing good tip, is I will say to the panelists, either if I don't have a chance to pre-interview them, then at least before the event on the day, I'll get them together and say, I want us to bounce off each other as much as possible. I don't want to go through and like interview you like you just suggested. That's boring for the audience. I want you to, if I'm asking a question to Leanne and then Ken, you want to jump in, just jump in, you know. It's a little bit more tricky to do that when it's on a virtual panel, but on a live discussion, it's just like, you know, that's the way conversation goes, is people do, you know, put their 2 cents worth in, and then someone else will add another comment, and that makes it really engaging for the audience. And that's much more interesting than just having me going, oh, well, Ken, what do you think? Or Leanne, what do you think? And you're right, having everyone agreeing. But again, if you're asking questions about why is this important, or then you're not asking a yes, no, do you agree with this? And they'll just all go yes, 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 yes. But you'll be asking, why is this important? Or, you know, how can we improve on this? Or, you know, so again, the quality of the questions you ask, massive difference into the quality of the answers, I think.
Yeah, and I think what the massive sort of red thread through this conversation is that importance of preparing and going in with intention as well, and taking the time and effort to do that, which if you do that already, you're really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather the more work you can put in beforehand, the easier it will be on the day. So it's a false equivalence to think, oh, I don't have time to prepare, I'll just wing it, because it makes the process so much easier.
Yeah, you can sort of relax in, breathe a little bit lighter. And in terms of
exactly, relax in, and then you enjoy the process, and you actually enjoy being up there. And particularly if it's a topic that's, and you know, a lot of things are quite involved or detailed, or a lot of jargon. Like I did an event last week about hospital funding and health funding. And so there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of different terms for different things. But so I really needed to be across it in a lot of detail, so that, because I had Australia's best experts on stage with me, and, you know, we wanted, and in the audience, again, we had from all around Australia, we had people interested in health funding who knew the topic really well. So we wanted a nice detailed discussion and good analysis. So I had to get my head into it to make so that I could then, you know, be a good facilitator. And if I hadn't have done that prep work, there's no way I would have just been able to get on stage and just wing that discussion when I started using acronyms and, you know, this and that. And so I could interpret the acronyms for the audience and say, oh, well, what that means for those of you who may not know, I could then interpret it, because that's the other thing that, you know, jargon, it's fine for the people who understand it, but you can't assume that everyone understands it. And so if you're facilitating an event, you need to be thinking, not everyone in the audience might understand all this. How can I make sure everyone in the audience is really understanding the key points that person's making?
Yeah, so you're playing the role of translator as well. And the other role that came up for me as you were talking was also the role of commentator. So I remember watching some of the FIFA World Cup games and hearing Bashar, just the way that he shared their names, and he must have practiced those names from you know, people from other countries. It's like, wow, yeah. You can't just wing that on the spot. Like, he must have phonetically understood that, rehearsed it. You're doing the same thing with acronyms and translating materials as well. And it just shows, you know, that you've done your work and like connecting with the audience as well.
Yeah. And look, you don't want to come across as a know-it-all, and you're certainly not there to sort of show up that you know more than the panel. It's not about you. That's the other thing I find as a facilitator, is they're not there to hear you, and they're not there to hear your opinions. You're the sort of glue that weaves it all together. And it's the same when you're being an MC of a conference or emceeing an event. I'm not a huge fan of MCs that get up and talk and talk and talk. It's not about you. You're there. You want to make your guests you want to sort of spotlight them and highlight how good they are and the value they're bringing to the audience, and weave it all together and keep it all moving and keep it on time as well. So there's a lot of roles you have, but it's not about you, and you're not there to sort of hog the spotlight.
Yeah, the spotlight effect. Yeah, that move it away from yourself. And I like that glue that weaves it together. And honestly, through this conversation, we've woven so much stuff in, from your experience, experiencing burnout, through to meditation. Thank you for your tip. You know, I really need to start doing this, and I should make
there's a couple of really good apps that have helped me as well, Leanne. I love which I'll share with the audience. So there's two that I really love. One is called Insight Timer. It's a weird name. It's just the word insight and then timer. It's the world's biggest meditation app. It's completely free. So It's got all the best meditation teachers on it. And I've recorded some meditations there as well. But the good thing about an app like that is there's so much to choose from. Just listen to a few different meditation teachers, find someone's voice that you like the sound of. And then you can just, most people put up a whole lot of meditations regularly. And so there's so much content, and you'll find something there, hopefully, that you like. The other one that I really love is called Balance. And Balance is an American app, but it's free for a year and then you have to pay. But it's worthwhile because it's got the most amazing algorithm behind it that really personalizes it for you. So it might be that you can choose the type of meditation, the length of the meditation, and it remembers all the things that you put in. And so it creates a personalized meditation for you. It's very bespoke. So I love that. I love that because it remembers all the things that you like, and it'll create something that it knows you will like.
That's great. Yeah.
So
it sounds like
you can download the app for free, and then you can get a year for free, and then you have to pay, but it's worthwhile. I actually pay for it. It's worthwhile. I love it.
Yeah, I was just, thank you. So Insight Timer and Balance app. I was laughing about you talking about the personalization. I don't really go on TikTok that often, but I went on last night and I was like, wow, this algorithm is good. It's feeding me stuff that I'm laughing at, that I'm enjoying.
And so, so when you get something like that, where the algorithm really nails the brief and really nails you, you're like, oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, I would love to see whoever designed it. They must have this amazing, chart with it's so well done. So, but there's that one, and there's also, so I would suggest people get both, and then between the two, you'll find something that you like.
Yeah, amazing. So this has been great. And thank you so much for sharing all your, what you do behind the scenes and really in detail, because that's the stuff that we like to hear. It's very pragmatic. I've got a few really good ideas now. If I ever host a panel soon of things that I can do to really bring that alive. If our listeners would love to connect with you, find out more about the great work that you do, where can we send them?
Yeah, so the website's probably the best. It's just sophiescott.com.au, and that's got all my socials. So my YouTube channel, which I've been doing videos for YouTube, and then I get really busy doing events. So I've actually just hired a VA to help us with the editing of YouTube videos. So there'll be more videos coming up on YouTube, and then Instagram and LinkedIn, and they're the main socials. But the website's probably the best because it's got everything there. And I would love to connect with other people and get their feedback on this episode. If there's things that they've enjoyed or they want more information about, I'd love to get some feedback. And I love these sort of podcasts that are so practical. That's why I listen to your podcast, because you always get practical tips out of it. And I think sometimes as a host, you can feel like, you're out there just doing it. It's just nice to hear other people, what they do and how they do it. And you always come away with at least one good tip. That's my goal is, as a listener as well, you think you want to come away with something practical that you can then put into your own work. And so hopefully today people can take some tips away and think, oh yeah, I'll give that a go.
Definitely. And connect with Sophie. Your LinkedIn you're going great guns. In fact, one of the reasons I reached out was because I think every time I logged on, your posts were going viral. I'm like, wow, Sophie's really nailing it here. I'd love to hear more about what she's doing. So congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, look, LinkedIn, I would definitely suggest people to go on LinkedIn. It's an amazing platform for engagement and for really quality engagement with people who are just there to learn. And again, with LinkedIn, the other thing, Leanne, I always, when I'm writing a post, always think about what am I going to give the audience that's of value? It's not about me and what even if I want to talk about something I've been doing, my key thing is what is the audience going to get out of this that they can take away and use or find useful or interesting? So even if it's a sort of personal post and something that I've been doing, you want the audience to think that was worthwhile reading. I got something out of that. And I think that's why they do well, because, a lot of people put stuff on LinkedIn that's like, oh, I've got a new job or I've just done this. It's like, well, good for you, but there's nothing in it for the audience.
Yeah.
So if you think about what you're putting out and how the audience is going to benefit. And the thing is, a lot of people who would be listening to this have a lot of knowledge that they are probably holding on to that they don't realize that other people would find that really interesting. So writing about what you know, if you know it well, then you're going to be giving the audience some information and knowledge that they can then use. And so I think that's why the posts have done well. And also the other thing though, Leanne, I must say, it's consistency. When I realized that my LinkedIn posts were doing really well, I made commitment to myself, and which is not that hard because I love writing, to do it regularly, to knock out. I mean, LinkedIn posts are only quite short. They're only the 500 words or less, but you can't just do it once every 6 weeks and expect to get, traction. You've got to be doing it on a more regular basis.
That's a great call to action. And I like your litmus test. It again relates back to how you run your session. So it's just taking that theme of focusing on giving value, but just taking it at a meta level to LinkedIn and just seeing it work there as well. So good reminder for me, because I with the book I've been like, well, like me.
No, but even the thing with the book, Leanne, this is a friend of mine who I actually really want her to come on your podcast, because she's an amazing facilitator, Rosie. She's written a book. And so I said to her, and you've got your amazing book as well. You can use the knowledge in the book as a way of putting little snippets of the book out, and people will be reading that and they'll be going, oh, wow, that's so interesting. I better get that book. And so that's a way of, so you can, even if you just use like a tiny bit from the book in each post, then it's like a little taster, and then people will be like, oh, that looks really interesting. I better get that one.
I love that. That's an awesome. Thank you. I feel like I'm being a coach now. That's wonderful. So I'm writing down my ideas here.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being so transparent and honest and sharing what works for you. It's been great having you on the show, Sophie.
Thanks, Leanne.